Bingo. So good morning. I sometimes feel like I'm a little bit of an interloper at these conferences because my background is in IT service management, the dreaded ITSM. And in fact, my kind of journey into getting more immersed in the DevOps world almost started by accident. 3 years ago when I found a conference in Belgium called Configuration Management Camp. And part of my responsibility as a product manager in the ITSM space has always been around CMDB. So I thought, oh, configuration management, CMDB. Signed up for the conference, then read the page properly, and then realized that we kind of speak a slightly different language. You know, configuration management in ITSM, configuration management in the software-defined infrastructure space are two different things with only a little bit of connection. So I went to the conference anyway. I mean, it's in Ghent. Ghent is beautiful, and actually found that I had one of the biggest learning experiences of my life. Really started to understand that software-defined infrastructure, and by extension, you know, the world of DevOps, was this really quite incredible organic movement that had been growing up almost from first principles. Perhaps unlike ITSM, which was really kind of a top-down encapsulation of practices. But I also kind of got the impression even then that some of the people at that conference, which has mainly been focused on kind of startups and open source communities, that some of the people I spoke to at that conference were working in larger companies and were starting to kind of collide with the realities of working in complex established enterprises. And that conversation actually came to a head when Luke Kanies, who many of you probably know was the founder of Puppet, was in a panel discussion, and the conversation went that way, and he kind of said, stop. There's been a lot of bad things said about the enterprise space in this conference, and yeah, they're kind of slow. But as he said, they're not slow because of stupidity, they're not slow because of a general aversion to new technology. Some of them are, but mostly it's because they're scared of breaking things, and the reason they're scared of breaking things is because those established companies have got established user bases, established revenue lines. They are terrified of changing anything that's going to kill off what they already do. So that's a good point, and what I now increasingly see, you know, DevOps is getting bigger and bigger, even in those companies. They all know they've got to do something. It's very rare, though, that an enterprise can just flip a switch and start doing things differently. There's a few exceptions, but by and large, mostly the journey of DevOps in a large company is that they'll try and set up a little startup within the company. And DevOps almost starts in stealth mode as far as the rest of the company is concerned. So a great example of this I heard recently, it was on Michael Cote's podcast, Software Defined Interviews, where he was talking with somebody from a large US energy infrastructure supplier. It's a classic example of a big, complex, established technology base, a lot of it very old. And the man who was being interviewed has set up a team that's building mobile apps for line workers. And they're doing it almost under the radar, and they've got a few users, and they're testing and iterating, and it sounds like the work they're doing is great. They're kind of at this phase. What happens, though, from this phase is that we start finding that these services get adopted by users. You know, success happens, and more people start using these tools. But then, unfortunately, you go from 100 users to 1,000 users to 10,000 users. Our biggest customer has over 200,000 employees and deals with 25,000 tickets a day. And one thing that can be said for ITSM is it's over 20 years or so, it's moved that scaled support from post-it notes and adhocracy to a pretty professional, slick set of tools and practices. But there are challenges with the way it does things, and what I'm going to talk about today is one particular organizational structure that is the norm across IT service management, and that's 3-tier support. And why I think it's a problem for IT service management, but why we also see it as potentially a very big problem for DevOps. So let's take a look at it. The classic organizational structure of a large support organization, and it's not just in IT support, it's in customer services and other supporting operations, is to kind of model things in tiers, and typically it's 3 tiers. So at the top there will be your service desk. Like I say, typically in most companies that's a very well-established function. Increasingly there's a lot of automation, a lot of self-service, but effectively what they're doing is providing that front line to the customer. But then below that, Partly because these people tend to be, the less experienced people. They're kind of technical. A lot of companies hire up here people with good people skills and then worry about the technical skills later. So you have this underlying level of level 2 support, which is typically certified experts in a broad range of technologies. Often it's the people who've proved themselves at level 1, a year or two later will go to level 2. Then underlying all that are the product line specialists. If you work in an application team in an organization, if you're a database administrator, if you're a server tech, you probably find yourself in one of these level 3 teams. And then the root of any kind of issue through that structure, they'll try and fix it here. Most things generally are fixed at level 1. Most things are quite repetitive. It's the password resets, it's the how do I's. Some things then don't get fixed at that level, and of course the idea is that things escalate. Level 1 can't fix it, we'll assign it to level 2. Level 2 will then sit on it for a while, think about it for a while, figure if they can fix it, and if they can't fix it, eventually it works its way down to level 3. And maybe you're already seeing the problem. We've already got queues of work in progress happening, and we've already got silos and pockets of knowledge. So what actually happens is that things, they can take a while to get, they might sit there for a while at level 1. We might be missing the fact that the answer is very readily available in the next level or down in the technical team. So for the customer, the user, they've got to actually wait for this ticket to kind of dribble its way through this structured process of queues. There's another fundamental problem, which is that, as I said, these people are typically less experienced than these people. These people have less specialist technical knowledge than these people. So even when that ticket's going to escalate, nobody quite knows what to ask. And the rate at which tickets bounce back is pretty horrible. So there's another problem for you as that user who wants something fixed. You're also waiting for these teams to figure out how they're gathering the right information, and it's a pretty crappy experience to sit and wait. A third really big problem is even when stuff gets to level 3, because of these kind of pockets of knowledge, you might find there's a handful of people who can kind of cross the technical knowledge between 2 different level 3 teams. And those people tend to receive an alarming proportion of the tickets. And actually they're seen in the organization as that brilliant person who can fix anything. We've talked a lot about burnout at this conference. Well, this is an absolute recipe for burnout for these people. They're over-relied on. I saw a really scary example of this in an organization that was supporting some really big hospitals, some really big-name hospitals in the UK. And our UX chap who was with me actually pointed out that this person's desk had tracks to it from people's chairs on the floor. Everyone would push their chair over to that person, tap them on the shoulder, interrupt their flow on whatever they were doing, and try and kind of get that knowledge from them. And eventually, a lot of things were being assigned that person's way as well. So enter swarming. Swarming is something that has been emerging over the last few years, and it's not a new concept, but it's kind of been defined and encapsulated by an organization called the Consortium for Service Innovation. I've tweeted a link to their page. And they do 2 things, really. They're a group of practitioners, experts. They involve actually a number of key people from our customers. And they've produced 2 frameworks. One is knowledge-centered service, which is a really good attempt at making knowledge management work better. And that's worth a read as well. But the other is this framework they call intelligent swarming. And underpinning that is this notion, effectively, that we tear up that 3-team structure. We take that away. We come up with a new way of organizing our support organization so that it's less a stack of silos with queues, and it's more something much more dynamic and collaborative and flexible. One of the things they point out is that it even changes the way we have to think about what individual success looks like. In the old 3-tier measure, we can kind of measure how many teams fix what things, but it's not really typical to find that people are really measuring the things that create great value. If we swap, then we can't measure that stuff anyway. We've got to think about value. So it actually encourages a better way of thinking. Now, BMC, I'm here to talk about swarming really, but rather than BMC, but I thought I'd illustrate the fact that we've done this in our own customer service organization. So I'm sort of talking from our own experiences here. And we're a pretty big company. We've got 6,000 employees. We sell a big range of software. It's stuff that's often around in big companies. And so we have a pretty large support organization facing our customers. As you see, it's dotted around the world. We've got a lot of specialists in that organization and a lot of different product lines. And what we've allowed to happen is each of those kind of support areas has been encouraged at their own pace to look at swarming, to figure if it's right for them. And most of them have gone down this path. And the typical pattern within a BMC support business unit is to model on 3 different types of swarm. There are variances. As I say, it's self-organized, so they can do it however they feel they need to do it. But the typical types of swarm are these. The first, I'll look at the flow of a ticket through these things. So initially there is a prioritization that happens, and that helps to drive us in one of several different directions. And the first thing that I'll talk about is what we call severity 1 swarming. And this is kind of a rapid response to things that are genuinely on fire, that have to happen, have to be fixed right away. We put some agents on schedule. They provide an immediate response. We typically have a lead. It's important at this point to say this is nothing new. This is nothing new in the DevOps world. This is nothing new in the incident ITSM world. So we've just put a name to what happens anyway for those incredibly big incidents in pretty much every company. There'll be a war room, they'll pull the right people in, they'll get things done. Where the novelty starts to appear is with what we call a dispatch swarm. And this is really this rejection of this idea that you have to start at level 1 and escalate certain things to level 2. We've effectively thrown that away in favor of a team that meets every hour or so and just reviews all the incoming issues within a business unit. And really what they're trying to do is not even think too hard about the priority of the ticket, not think too hard about arbitrary process. They're cherry picking. If we can fix this ticket right now, why worry about what the SLA time is? Let's just get it fixed. The other thing they're doing as a secondary goal is making sure that if it has got to go to a product line team, that it's not going to come straight back. So have we got the right information? Have we captured everything that product line team could conceivably need? And we do this typically on a paired basis. We'll take an experienced support analyst and put them together with somebody relatively new. And they'll convene every hour or so and perform this exercise of trying to fix what can be fixed and validating everything else. And that accounts for about 30% of our issues. So that cherry-picking process means that 30-odd% of those issues that would go into this queue system are actually fixed in an hour or so. And then a lot of things go to what look a little bit more like traditional product line teams. That's what works for us. We still have specialist areas within each product because we sell on-premise and cloud software, usually both options for the same tool. So there'll be database teams, there's server teams, there's front-end teams. And we have a global setup, so there are instances of teams dotted around the world. Like I say, we're quite a big distributed company. But the third type of swarm now comes into play to stop a classic problem of this sort of structure, which is that once things get to the third tier in an organization, they ping around. Front-end team says it's not them. Server team says it's not them. Networks team says it's not them. And eventually this ticket has bounced around so many times that a lot of organizations have a counter on their service desk system that when a ticket reassigns more than a certain number of times, it sort of steps in and assigns it to someone, which is a very reactive and suboptimal way of dealing with a big problem, I think. So rather than allowing any of these teams to reassign stuff between each other, or even worse, to pick on individuals, we convene what we call backlog swarms. And backlog swarms are highly self-organizing. There's no rules, really. The whole point is, no rules beyond stop assigning stuff to each other. This is just an opportunity in most cases for people to take those troublesome issues that they might have to reassign elsewhere normally, but just convene a group of people And this is usually done on a drop-in basis. A team might set up one of these sessions a day, or in some cases 3 a day for an hour, which actually I'm told is enough to save them a lot of time overall. People come into these sessions, they'll be on a chat ops type of interaction, or they'll have a call, they'll bring video, they'll bring screenshots, they'll come prepared with information, and typically there's a lead who is convening these sessions who will figure out, based on what they've told is coming into the next swarming session, let's bring in that team, let's bring in this team, have everybody ready, get it all done. So instead of the ticket pinging around everywhere, the group of people who might be needed to make that cross-functional problem fix are all together. And that's worked really well. We had to set up these general guidelines. It's not something that we wanted to make prescriptive. 3-tier support and a lot of ITSM in practice is a very linear prescriptive process. We wanted to give teams the opportunity to figure out better ways of doing things. We had to throw away a lot of the old metrics, which I don't think is a bad thing, because a lot of metrics are kind of meaningless when they involve just measuring who happened to be the person in the pass the parcel game at the end of the game. But we also found that it was bringing more people into customer-facing scenarios. We can bring the users into the swarm if that's going to get things done. So we had to help some people, through a bit of mentoring, a bit of guidance, just to make sure they were kind of happier in that customer-facing role, where previously, the service desk themselves would have been at the end of a chain of communications. And we just, by setting this all up, as we've said, we stopped that problem of direct escalations to people. And the way we've done this actually is by really kind of thinking about tooling as well. We use Skype for business, for our enterprise chat tool, and a lot of stuff goes on that. A lot of stuff is built on drop-in sessions and ad hoc sessions with ChatOps. So it's been quite nice sort of seeing the rise of chat-based support in our company. A year or so after we started, we sat down and looked at some of the numbers, and they were pretty striking. The performance improvements we had were, on the measured targets, were pretty cool. I mean, there was a very strong correlation between starting this activity and improving fix rates and improving customer satisfaction. But one of the best things that happened as well was that people found that they had more time to do more productive things. You think support organizations in particular, support is their job, but actually you can take toil away from support people too. And when you do that, you find that support people are suddenly involved in building much more proactive ways of dealing with things, less repetition. And even in some cases, we had people who were able to come up with new support offerings that we were able to offer to our customers. So it even drove better support options for our customers, and that translates to revenue. So I guess the question is, what has this got to do with DevOps? Well, hopefully you maybe see some of the structures in this operational paradigm that already are kind of going against the grain of what DevOps has tried to achieve. But as I said at the start, increasingly I'm seeing DevOps teams emerging in big organizations, and the more I talk to DevOps practitioners at conferences, the more I will hear some people say, yeah, we're starting to get a bit overwhelmed with day-to-day support. I spoke with a developer at Configuration Management Camp this year who said now half of their time in their team is not spent developing new stuff. Then recently the State of DevOps report came out, and actually the numbers correlate pretty closely to some of the things I'm hearing. So even in an elite organization, which according to that report is what, the top 8%, even they're spending 20% of their time on support activities. And for the less elite organizations, it's quarter or more. When I go and talk about this to the ITSM world, I've always tried to kind of push the fact that DevOps is not going away. It's doing things incredibly successfully. It's really changed the way people work. And ITSM needs to stop thinking about how DevOps can just be subsumed into what ITSM does today. And we need to flip the way we think and think about how we can make DevOps even more successful. And right here are examples of areas where I hope ITSM can bring value and knowledge and scalable support to take away some of that work from the DevOps people so that they can be building things. Because the way things have been tried so far hasn't really been working. This is an old quote now, 4 years old. IDC looked at the sort of success rate of IT organizations just trying to kind of encapsulate DevOps without changing much else. And the failure rates are very high. So what we need to be doing is thinking about the ways that we can stop these things impacting your roles, especially if you're starting to work in larger companies. How can we stop the stuff that ITSM does that sucks, causing you a problem? How can we make sure the stuff that ITSM does is good, that's good, helps you to do your job better? Because one thing you've done as a movement is really challenged a lot of those norms in service management. It's changing the way technology works in an enterprise. It means that you've got more software being built, less software being brought in, which means a lot more resolutions will rely on developers. Changes, the classic kind of, the classic bad spot of ITSM from the perspective of DevOps people is the old clunky change management processes, and you've been right to attack those, and I think the stats show that actually the DevOps way is producing better outcomes anyway. But that IT organization isn't really set up to cope with daily releases. And what you'll find is that support front end, half the time don't even know about new services popping up until they popped up. So that's been a challenge. There's also even tooling problems. I work with one of the big ITSM tools, but when I speak to DevOps teams in enterprises, primarily they work with Jira. What does that tell us? It means that things are just being thrown over the wall. We've built integrations between our products and Jira, and we're trying to make sure it's a very collaborative integration, but nevertheless, it's very illustrative of the fact that we're all kind of working in different places. The customer doesn't care where we're working, they just want those things fixed. But as I say, when we translate what DevOps is doing into the enterprise, you've got that problem that your user base can get very big very quickly. You've also got a challenge that enterprises are not going to change overnight. And if you work, for example, in a bank, it's quite striking how much mainframe management software still gets sold to banks. There's a lot of legacy infrastructure. There's a lot of new cloud infrastructure. Multi-cloud is very much the enterprise reality, whether we like it or not. And we can all talk about refactoring and the efficiency of doing so, but those companies probably want to spend that money on moving forwards as much as they want to spend it on fixing what they've got. So anytime you get a ticket in an enterprise, anytime you hear of an issue in an enterprise, one of the hardest things I find speaking to DevOps professionals is, what the hell is going on? We've been paged at 4 in the morning. I don't know whether this thing is really impacting users. I don't know if this thing is critically impacting other services. I need visibility of what's going on. Well, over in ITSM, we've kind of been doing that pretty well. So there's a good opportunity to help you with that. And that comes down to, what that comes down to, of course, is at some point in an enterprise, you might have a queue with 100 things in that have come through the support channel. But you've also got 100 things you want to build. How can you make that decision about what to leave behind, what to build? There is a role for IT service management in helping you do what you do better. But then I talk to ITSM people about DevOps a lot, and it is a little scary, that DevOps hasn't really penetrated that world in a great way. You notice I'm here. Are there any other kind of ITSM people at this conference today? 1, 2, that's pretty normal. There's not been enough outreach, probably from either community to the other, but certainly from ITSM to DevOps. I use this slide a lot at ITSM conferences to point out all the things we're doing that are kind of the antithesis of what DevOps is doing. We encourage queues, we encourage silos, we encourage things being thrown over the wall from one team to another. Knowledge sharing doesn't work very well. One great thing about DevOps, it's actually brought together two adjacent development operations, two adjacent practices, and brought them together so they can feed off each other's knowledge, which is great. And of course, there's the human factor. One of the things that DevOps does really well as a movement is think about the cultural framework within which everybody works. And you don't get enough presentations about burnout and individual pressure outside the DevOps conference world. You'd be surprised how little that's covered in the kind of corporate ITSM world. So you're doing a lot of things right, and the problem is a lot of the things that we do wrong, a lot of the things that would annoy a DevOps team are kind of baked into this process. As you say, the problem you're going to find is you risk finding yourself here. But what I would say is that DevOps people in enterprises are seen as agents of change. You're seen in a positive light. This movement has really caught the attention of CEOs, CIOs. They all read the State of DevOps report. They all see the success of organizations, of their competitors, who work on much faster release cycles with better trust baked into the process. You've got a really good opportunity to, if you're in that situation, if you're working at a big company, or if you're acquired by a large company, to have your voice heard and talk about the problems that you see coming. And this is one example of a framework which I really see as something that you could be addressing. If you subsume us into this three-tier structure, it's not working the way we want to work. It would be negligent, though, if I didn't sort of go looking for problems with something. It's all very well to be kind of, to be drawn in by what looks like an obvious answer to a problem. And we do speak now with an increasing number of customers who are working this way. And it's not without its issues. And so these are from sort of real conversations this year with customers. What's not going right when you've started adopting swarming? And one of the first ones actually is that, which is kind of worrying, and we need to work on this. Some people have seen their cost of support going up. So they've seen as we did at BMC, they've seen real improvements in some of the key measures. But actually, one thing about the sort of service desk end of things is it's cheap. It might actually be cheaper to have that customer's issue lingering around for 5 days than to have a slightly more optimized process that fixes it in a day. So there's a tricky balancing act to be had there. The customer's happy, but the financial side of the organization may not be. It is, this second point, this is, as I say, this is what customers are telling me, or people in the industry are telling me. They find it difficult to establish how well individuals are performing, because they no longer have that kind of point assignment going on to particular individuals. My view is actually they were measuring the wrong things in the first place anyway, but it's because very rarely with something complex was that individual the only person who contributed. But a lot of people want to know who their strong people are, who they want to reward, who they want to promote. We need to think about how in a swarming scenario we can actually identify who are the key people, while also dealing with the next problem, which is that, like in any conversation, as was pitched for the open spaces yesterday, you often get very dominant individuals who will hold a lot of the conversation, and that's not always a positive thing either. And then one final thing, one thing about reassignment paths is they're quite easy to automate. People kind of know if they need a database person to look at something, they can throw it at the database team. Most the service desks these days don't even think about who to assign it to. They categorize the ticket and the system does the work. Whereas when we're working in a group situation, especially if you're new to a company, how do you know who to invite? And if you look at that Consortium for Service Innovation page, they're very focused on that issue. They're defining something called intelligent swarming, which attempts to, in their case, kind of use skills profiles and past activities to figure out who to invite. We're looking at doing it a little bit differently and thinking about how we can maybe use machine learning and other technologies to suggest people to work with, while at the same time not burden individuals with all the work. So there are open challenges. So I'll just conclude. I presented this in May, and the day I presented it, I found a really fantastic article by Hank Barnes of Gartner, which really chimed with this approach and with the philosophy behind it. So that's worth a look. He talked about the fact that actually, and does a bit of analysis about the fact that often the greatest value is created when people break out of these molds, break out of the box, and do things a little differently. This is what we've tried to encourage to happen in our own support organization, and it's been very successful. More broadly, of course, it's kind of what DevOps is. It's a big step outside the box. So just to reiterate, if you're in an enterprise, you should not be afraid to challenge some of these orthodoxies and avoid getting sucked into that process. And as a last word, the first person I ever really spoke to at BMC about how we were doing this was one of the most experienced support people I know. He's been around my product for a good 10 years, based in London, and he's the sort of person I thought probably couldn't know anything more. And yet he just sat there and said, because of swarming, in 1 year I've doubled my knowledge of the product. So this is an incredibly powerful statement from somebody in his position. If someone like him is learning that much faster, then imagine the impact it's having on the new people we bring into the organization. So if you want to know some more, there's, as I say, I've tweeted these links. The Consortium for Service Innovation page is really interesting. They're not just focused on IT, they think about customer service and the broader support area, but it provides some pretty good resources. I've got a Medium blog where I wrote a long article that's gone the nearest I've ever kind of had to viral. It's had something like 20, 30,000 views and a lot of attention in the DevOps community, so it's clearly resonated. And I've had some other fun on that blog, you know, mapping this to things like Kinevan, so very, you know, it's an interesting thing to think through and play with, especially when we're figuring out how we can start reducing some of these big gaps between enterprise support and what you're doing in the community. So I'll just finally say, keep up the good work, keep doing what you're doing. It's been very inspiring from a little bit outside the camp to see what this movement has achieved so far. And let's just make sure we work a bit better together so that we don't stop you doing more of it. Thank you very much.